Alrighty, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Back to School Safety webinar. My name is Laura Lagunes, and I work for the Public Good Projects. I will be your moderator for tonight's event. This webinar is hosted by the Public Good Projects in collaboration with the City University of New York School of Public Health, the Hedrick Martin Institute, and Children's Aid. We are offering live Spanish interpretation for today's event. If you are joining us from a Windows or Mac device, you can look for the global icon located on the bottom bar of your screen. There is a drop-down menu for selecting your preferred language. If you're calling in from an Android or an iOS device, in your meeting controls, you can actually select more, and you should be able to select your preferred language from a drop-down list. And Jorge will be our Spanish interpreter for this evening. So thank you, Jorge. Great. All righty, so moving on to today's agenda. In a minute, I'm going to introduce our three lovely panelists who are each going to provide some high-level perspectives regarding messaging around youth COVID-19 boosters, monkeypox, routine immunizations, and other community health guidance for school-aged children in the city. Next, we'll have a panel discussion, and thank you to those who submitted questions for our panelists prior to this event. I will kick off the discussion with those questions, and then we can move on to answer questions asked from the QA box. So you will remain muted throughout the panelists' presentations, but you can use the raise hand feature to be unmuted, or you can ask a question. You can also ask a question using the Q&A tab in the Zoom taskbar, and you can submit that at any time throughout this event. And as a special thank you for attending this evening, we are going to have a raffle and announce 3 lucky winners who will receive, ta-da, a $50 Amazon gift card. So make sure to stick around when we make those announcements. All righty, now to the good stuff. So I would like to introduce you to our featured panelists for today's session. Aisha Abdullah is a science writer at the Public Good Projects, where she writes about misinformation, myths, and conspiracy theories related to science and health. Aisha received her PhD in neuroscience from Weill Cornell Medical College and has nearly a decade of experience in science communications. Next, we have Dr. Lauren Jen. Lauren is the Assistant Medical Director of School and Camp Health at the Children's Aid Society. She attended medical school at SUNY Stony Brook, where she graduated with honors and then completed her residency at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. In 2020, she was named as one of the United Hospital Fund's inaugural PEDS, stands for Pediatrics for the Equitable Development Start Fellows, where she completed a 15-month fellowship. So outside of the office, Lauren is very involved in the American Academy of Pediatrics, including participation on the School Health Committee and the section on early career physicians. Lauren loves working in a diverse, vibrant neighborhood and is inspired by the children and families with whom she works. She takes pride in being a member of such a distinguished community-based organization that has a deep commitment to the children of New York City. As a mother, she is motivated to work for justice for all children and give all children the same opportunities as her children. And then last, we have Crimson Porco. Crimson is an outreach program manager with over 10 years of experience serving their community. Driven by the plight of displaced, disparaged, and forgotten LGBTQIA+ youth, Crimson takes pride in providing outreach, clothing, hygiene items, and a great emphasis on triaging to other care providers within our network. As the homeless outreach program manager at the Hedrick Martin Institute, it is their goal to provide the highest quality of care within each young person utilizing their services. And just a fun fact that the Hedrick Martin Institute is the oldest and largest not-for-profit multi-service agency dedicated to serving LGBTQIA plus youth ages 13 to 24. So thank you all three for being here and taking the time to connect with us. I'm going to pass the mic over to Aisha first, who will be kicking us off. So take it away, Aisha.
Thanks, Sarah. So I'm going to give an overview of what we're looking at with respect to COVID as we head into fall and winter. So obviously, none of us can predict exactly what's going to happen, but based on what we've seen the last 2.5 years, and particularly with the Omicron variant, we can make some educated guesses about what we can expect. So right now, the state of COVID-19 is that the BA.5, which is the current dominant strain, it has peaked. So we're seeing a decrease in cases, hospitalizations, and deaths, which is very encouraging. If that trend continues, and at least right now, there's no reason to think that that won't, we can expect the next month or maybe a month or two to be pretty quiet on the COVID front. There are other Omicron subvariants that are on the horizon, and those are most likely to circulate this fall and winter. The good thing is that all of those subvariants seem as though they're going to produce mild illness, similar to what we've seen with other Omicron subvariants. But the thing that I always emphasize when I use the word mild is that even the milder subvariants can produce severe illness, particularly in people who are immunocompromised, people who are older, or who have conditions that make them at a higher risk for severe illness. And they're also highly contagious, which means that even when the illness that's generally being produced is mild, a higher number of people will get sick, which means that more people will be hospitalized and more people potentially could die. So it's really important to remember that even though we're looking at a fall and winter that might be, we might be seeing more of the Omicron subvariants, that doesn't necessarily mean that we are out of the woods. So going into the fall, it's going to depend on several things. This is not comprehensive, but I think the biggest factors are which variants are circulating, how many people end up getting the fall booster. So those are the Omicron specific boosters. And then how the federal, state, and city governments respond to changing COVID-19 threats. So as I mentioned, cases are decreasing now. If that changes in the fall and winter, which it is likely to, the way that the city and state government responds to that is going to determine how things actually go in the winter, in the fall and the winter. Next slide. So I'm including this image. It's one that I really like because it shows how COVID-19, or the virus that causes COVID-19, how it's changed since the beginning of the pandemic. And I think it's really important to look at this to understand why we're having the conversation that we're having right now about boosters. So that arrow pointing towards the original virus strain, that's what the vaccines that were first produced and the ones that all of us have, like that's what it was originally meant to protect against. And then all the way at the end where it's bright red, so BA.4/5, that's where we are now. So in the last 2.5 years, this virus has undergone a lot of different changes, and some of those changes have made it so that the antibodies that were produced either by the vaccine or by an infection no longer recognize this virus anymore. So we're relying on our immune system to fight a virus that we're actually it's no longer able to really recognize it because we're pretty far removed from it. So the Omicron specific boosters are really important because they're designed to recognize that all of those different changes. So they provide more protection than what we're currently getting with the primary vaccine series and the first boosters. So that's really exciting that we are now looking at a booster that's going to protect us as we're going into the fall and winter. So we're unlikely to be in the same situation that we were in last winter, where we had Omicron hit really hard, and a lot of people had lower immunity because they were further away from that initial vaccine dose. But again, that is highly dependent on how many people actually end up getting those Omicron-specific boosters. So that's, I guess, what's on the radar right now with that. Next slide. So with regards to vaccines and boosters for children, again, this is not a comprehensive list of why children should be vaccinated against COVID-19, but I think these are some of the ones that I think are most important. So vaccines protect children and teens against the worst of COVID-19. That's true for everyone, but I think it's really important to emphasize that with children because the narrative is often that children are not as affected by COVID-19 and they're much less likely to become severely ill. But some children do. And so it's important to make sure that they have that layer of protection against severe illness, hospitalization, and death. And vaccination also reduces the risk of infection and long COVID. So that's another important thing that you want to do. You want to protect children and teenagers against that. And I also think that there's a tendency to think that COVID-19 isn't serious when it comes to children when compared to other childhood illnesses that we routinely vaccinate against. And I just want to push back against that. In fact, COVID-19 does have a similar impact on children. It causes serious illness and hospitalization at similar or higher rates as other diseases that we routinely vaccinate children against. So I don't think that people should think that like this isn't, that we don't need to vaccinate children against that because COVID isn't serious when it comes to children. And then again, just emphasizing that even if we end up with another fall and winter with Omicron variants, those milder variants can still be very serious. In fact, during last winter's Omicron wave, we saw the highest COVID hospitalizations among children of the entire pandemic. And a fifth of all deaths in children from COVID was during a relatively short 2 or 3 month period when Omicron was hitting the US really hard. So next slide, please. So it's important to remember that protecting children against COVID and even milder COVID variants is important because it can potentially be quite serious. So the arrows here are pointing at 2 peaks of pediatric hospitalizations, and the highest peaks are during Omicron waves. So definitely an encouragement to vaccinate children and get them boosted against COVID-19. Next slide. So specifically focusing on the fall booster. So anyone who is over 12 and older, who is at least 2 months out from their last vaccine dose is eligible to get the booster. And this booster is really important, as I mentioned, because it protects against the Omicron and Omicron subvariants, but it also has the protection against the original strain. So that means that if we end up with other variants down the line that are not Omicron specific, we'll still have protection against severe illness and death in the way that the primary vaccine series provided. And so clinical trial data for a similar bivalent booster that protected against an Omicron and the original strain, it was more effective than the first booster against Omicron. So that's very encouraging. And I think just the main thing that I want to emphasize is that it's really important to stay up to date on COVID-19 vaccines. And the reason is that it ensures that you have the strongest possible protection. So whatever we happen to see in the fall, if you're boosted, you're going to be better off. And obviously that applies to children and teenagers. And this applies to other routine vaccines as well. You never want to be in a situation where there's an outbreak of a disease that you are not vaccinated against. And we are seeing this obviously right now in New York. There are a lot of people who are now trying to find out if they're vaccinated against polio or rushing to get their kids vaccinated against it. And you just don't want to be in that situation. Staying up to date on vaccines ensures that you have that protection, you're ahead of the curve, and you're not having to worry about those things. Next slide. Thanks. And then we talk about vaccines a lot, but obviously masks are still an important tool to stay safe. So New York City schools no longer require masks, but they are strongly recommended indoors. And so students have the option to wear masks if they want to use those to protect themselves. And high quality, well-fitted masks protect both the person wearing them and everyone around them. So they are very important, particularly for people who are immunocompromised or are high risk, or who have family members who are at high risk for severe illness. And also just for those who want to make sure that they're protecting everyone and protecting themselves as much as they can. So they add that extra layer of protection. They also protect against other respiratory infections. So a bonus of wearing a mask indoors is that you are less likely to end up getting colds or flus during cold and flu season. So that's a nice bonus. Next slide. And then finally, I just wanted to touch on when it's a good idea to test for COVID-19. So with kids going back into schools, and particularly with mask mandates no longer in place, a lot of children are likely to be exposed to COVID this school year. So if you have, or if a child has COVID-19 symptoms, test immediately. That's always the case. If you have COVID symptoms, test immediately. If you test negative and still have symptoms, you should test again within 2 days. And generally, it's a good idea to do 2 tests within 2 days, just to make sure if you got a false negative. If you are exposed, so you were around someone who had COVID and you don't have symptoms, test 5 days after exposure. And again, if you test negative, test again in 2 days just to be safe. And then if you test positive, test again after 5 days after you test positive, and wear a mask until you test negative. And in schools, students are required, if they test positive, to wear a mask in school within that 5-day period. Next slide. Yeah, so the key takeaways here are just that COVID-19 numbers are decreasing. We're expecting Omicron subvariants to dominate in the fall. Don't take for granted that these are milder variants, because they can still lead to severe illness. Staying up to date on vaccines and boosters is the best way to keep kids and teens safe this fall, and just generally with all vaccines. And wearing a mask is a good way to have an additional layer of protection, as is testing when you think you might have been exposed, or when you think you might have COVID, which helps to keep everyone safer. Thank you.
Thanks. So speak a little bit about the ripple effect that COVID has had on routine and preventable care for our youth and families. So, really building a lot on what Aisha talked about wanting to stay up to date, and the importance of not waiting until there's an outbreak of something. So we can go to the next slide. So just a few months ago, over the summer, the WHO put out this report really sounding the alarm that there was a precipitous decline in vaccination, and worldwide that millions and millions of infants are missing out on life-saving vaccines. And this was definitely not something that was caused by COVID, but certainly was sped up by COVID. We know that vaccine hesitancy has been on the rise over the past decades. There's been increasing vaccine refusal. And those two factors, then you add in lack of care during periods of lockdown, quarantine, isolation, and a real mistrust in vaccines leads us to the state we are now of millions and millions of infants missing out on life-saving vaccines. Next slide, please. So we obviously are very concerned about children missing visits because they're not getting their routine vaccinations. But in addition to their vaccines, there are all the other elements of routine visits that are really important. So as we are speaking and messaging with our youth and families, we, there are required physicals, certain touch points in schools where you are required to have a physical in order to enter. But there are several years where you're not necessarily required. And even pre-pandemic, we would sometimes see kids who went a few years without being seen, but now we're seeing it pretty regularly. So having kids come in who haven't been seen in a few years means all of the other things that we do in our visits have not been done. Routine blood work, routine measurement, height, weight, blood pressure, hearing, vision, all of those things, checking on making sure that development is normal, pubertal development is normal. And when we're not seeing families, we're not able to check and make sure that everything is progressing as it should be or intervene when we need to. The other thing that, in addition to medical care, and while this is not my area of expertise, dental visits have also really declined during the pandemic for a variety of reasons. Dental care was very, very difficult to access. So our pediatric dentists are now seeing disease that's much more progressed than what they had in the past, just because people hadn't been seen for so long. So really quickly, when we talk about our immune system, what are we talking about? Well, there's a few things, a few terms that get thrown around. One is our active immunity, which is your own body, right? So active immunity is the immunity that's created by our bodies when we're exposed to pathogens, which are, that cause disease. And this can be in the form of illness or vaccination. We often hear from parents when kids enter childcare for the first time, my kid is always sick. We say, yes, we understand. And these are normal, healthy kids. We expect that those kids could have anywhere between 20 to 25 viral infections in the first 2 years that they're in school. This is how you kind of get your immunity. You get sick and you get over it. And this way, the next time your body's exposed to something, you don't get quite as sick. The other form of active immunity are our vaccinations that Aisha talked about, that Aisha just spoke about. Then we also have our passive immunity, which is immunity that gets given to our body. It's usually pretty short-lived. Mainly when we think about that, we think of pooled immunoglobulins, or if you remember hearing about monoclonals during COVID, when there was some discussion of using that for treatment, and maternal antibodies, either through the placenta or through breastfeeding. And the last term that gets thrown around a lot is community immunity or herd immunity. And this is a function of kind of all of us in the community around us. And, we have these viruses that are kind of bouncing around, trying to find a host, trying to find a place that they can latch on and cause disease. And if everybody in your community is vaccinated or has immunity of some kind, it is much harder for the disease to take hold and really kind of move through the community quickly. So when community vaccination rates drop, we lose community immunity. And this is important because there are people in our community for whom they're not able to be vaccinated, they're not old enough, or people whose immune systems can't respond to vaccines in the way necessary to help keep them healthy. Next slide, please. So we've seen what happens when we lose community immunity, when vaccination rates drop. Back in 2019, before COVID, we had a measles outbreak in New York City. It was about 1,000 1,000 cases, mostly concentrated in a few areas with high rates of vaccine hesitancy, high rates of community members that were not vaccinated. And this is what happens when illnesses that we have attempted to eradicate are able to kind of latch on in the community when people are not vaccinated. We're definitely not in the same situation right now with polio, but we are very watching this very, very closely and making every effort to increase community vaccination so that we don't have an outbreak of polio, which could be devastating. Next slide. So when I think about vaccines, and one message that I think would encourage you to use when speaking with youth and families is, when I think about vaccines, I think about I put them into two main camps. I put them in the camp of there are illnesses that we want to never see. There are diseases that we hope to completely eradicate through vaccination. And when I think about those, I think about like measles or polio, that these are really devastating diseases that for a variety of reasons could be controlled and potentially eradicated with vaccines. And then there's our other camp of vaccines, and this is what I think of as our seatbelt vaccines. These are vaccines where we are likely not going to completely eliminate these viruses for a variety of reasons. They're smart, they're nimble. We're probably not going to get rid of them for good, but if we have our vaccines, it may not keep it, we have our seatbelt, it may not keep us from getting in the accident, but if something happens, we're protected. We don't wind up in the hospital or worse. And that's where I kind of put flu and COVID. So again, I think of them as a seatbelt. They're not necessarily going to prevent you from completely getting the illness. They might. If being vaccinated is definitely our best protection against getting sick with flu, against getting sick with COVID, against having to, stay home and miss all the wonderful things you have planned. But if you do get sick and you're vaccinated, it's like wearing your seatbelt. This should keep you from winding up in the hospital, seriously ill or with long-term effects. And I lastly just want to share with you this absolutely wonderful poster. And if any of our organizations, anyone here would like more information about how to order these, we would be happy to distribute them. This was put out by our New York Pediatric Residency Advocacy Coalition. And I am just so proud of our pediatric trainees. So these are fresh out of medical school doctors who are learning how to be pediatricians, who have put together this fantastic campaign around the city.
Well, hello there. Hello. Welcome to my fabulous slides. This is our messaging for LGBTQIA+ youth, reducing stigma while providing care. Next slide, please. That's me. I have a very different hair color. We like to change up the hair colors. But one thing I didn't mention in my bio, this is a fun fact, is I come from the world of nightlife and cabaret. And for many years as a house mother to many youth that were at risk in need of services. So I've been doing this work for a very long time without actually getting paid for it. And I transitioned it into a career because this is my passion and it's what I love to do. We're going to go to the next slide. We're going to talk about the Hedrick Martin Institute. The Hedrick Martin Institute provides community basic needs, health, education, and career services to thousands of queer youth every single year. It was founded in 1979 by Dr. Emery Hedrick and Dr. Damian Martin, who were colleagues who were also in a relationship, as well as the Institute for the Protection of Lesbian and Gay Youth. It was like a big league was the shorthand term. I'm glad that they changed it to the Hedrick Martin. It's a lot easier to say. And it was a response to needs of vulnerable and at-risk youth of the New York City, specifically a youth that got pretty badly beaten and bullied. And the shelter's response was, well, if you weren't gay, this wouldn't happen. And they were so just touched, like, and just hurt and angry by that plight. And that's why we are here. All services, including affirming counseling, is absolutely 100% free for young people. And we believe that all young people, regardless of sexual orientation or identity, deserve a safe and supportive environment in which to achieve their full potential. And last but not least, we typically provide over 2,000 youth with a broad range of vital direct services. And they come from 172 zip codes. And it'll probably change next year as well, as we are opened up after the pandemic. So what we're going to do is I'm mostly going to focus on our work with reducing stigma through COVID and monkeypox messaging. We're not going to really touch on polios. It's something that we haven't dealt with yet, but let's talk about reducing stigma. Now, you know what, how can we provide the best information without causing unintentional harm? Now, you might look at these 4 steps and be like, Clemson, that looks a little basic, but learning anything from COVID and the year 2020 and dealing with a mask mandate shows you that don't take anything for granted, because somebody will not understand this or maybe not recognize this as harm. So we're just going to kind of go over 4 basic steps that I always like to utilize as part of my mission statement when helping youth. Number 1, listen to you and being open to hearing experiences. What I mean about that is, you know, sometimes when we're listening to youth, we tend to go into back in my day. Your day was great. We love you. We're here for you. Like, I'm supporting you. But right now it's the youth's time, you know what I mean? And putting yourself in the perspective of what they might be going through right now is how we can help reduce that stigma, but also provide better messaging so that youth are able to make their own decisions on their own. Like, that's the goal, is me giving information so that youth can be like, all right, maybe I might get vaccinated, maybe I might not. Don't judge. Everyone's lived experiences are completely and utterly different. Just because you've experienced it a certain way doesn't mean that other youth are going to experience it the same way. We all experience life completely different. And so it's just very, very helpful to not insert. While you can do reflective listening and motivational interviewing, which I always feel is the best way to communicate with people, we always want to make sure that, oh, okay, we have done things certain different, like similar paths, but you've definitely gone this path, and I've done this path, and it's all okay. Empathize or try to see, or put yourself in their shoes. It's very important to say, hey, maybe I might have not experienced homelessness or experienced what's going on, but let me see, or try to feel like I need to put myself in their shoes and see kind of what they might be reacting to, which is very, very important. And number 4, I always like to say this, never assume, right? We never want to assume that maybe because a youth is telling you, oh, X, Y, and Z, they could be telling you that and feeling a completely different way. So it's very important that we, make sure we're utilizing this within our conversations with young people. So we're going to go to the next slide, please. All right, so let's talk about the barriers, messaging barriers of how the CDC and Department of Health have changed our methods of care by removing the mask mandate. And how you can connect when the mandates are changing and everything is changing about. So September 7th, was basically when the COVID mask mandate had ended for the transit systems and also for ride vehicles, Uber, Lyft, airports, homeless shelters, things like this. And it's very important. What our governor has said is masks are encouraged but optional on our mass transit across the state of New York. If you choose not to have a mask, it's your own risk assessment, which sometimes feels a little bit like, are we wearing masks? Are we not wearing masks? Are these actual real barriers? And while I understand it is our own risk assessment, I do feel like we do need to respect people's autonomy in terms of how they're getting vaccinated and the decisions that they're making. It's also saying, well, this is at your own risk, but their own risk can also put others at risk. So I try to kind of say, hey, maybe I might not agree with lifting this mask mandate, because I'm used to wearing masks. Not everybody is comfortable wearing masks. And quite frankly, I think if you've gone onto the subway, for those of you who are in New York, I know we have an international panel here and I love it. You know, half the people on the subway stopped wearing masks about months ago, and they haven't really really been paying attention to the mask mandate. So not only do we want to make sure that we're listening to our young people and providing the best care and the messaging, we also want to make sure that we're understanding the barriers of messaging to provide something that really will speak to you. So I'm going to go through 3 examples of how I've done this at the Hedrick Martin Institute. I kind of talk about the experiences and responses to it. So I'm going to go on to the next slide. So effective messaging and things that I really feel like, you know, you've gravitated towards or really got into. So the first one is our hashtag VaxFacts, like docu-series that I've done. And we had 4 internships. They were part of the Test and Trace internship. And it started from July 2020 and it ended June 30th, 2022. And we had a multitude of youth that came and went, but these 4 youth really stayed with the program because they really cared about the work that they are doing and really just all about servicing their community and how, you know, they could be better community leaders. And I absolutely love that, because if you've done outreach and you've gone in the field, it's hard work. You got to get, you know, 100 no's just to get 1 or 2 yeses. And most of the time, as the pandemic kind of came on, less and less people wanted to listen to you. So it was always kind of good to kind of get their perspective on things, because we're dealing with youth at HMI. And I can't just go based on my experience. That would make no sense. So I created this docu-series, and we are going to watch one of the videos. They're just tiny, like minute-long Instagram moments, but this is their stories through their own eyes and just really speaking on experiences. So let's go and play that for us. I don't think the volume is on. If we can get the volume on. I don't think the volume came on. I do apologize for that. But you're just seeing a little snippet of what it is. I'm going to actually go and provide the link and the other links from my Instagram. After I do this and we do the questions, I'll be able to provide a link for everybody. But the 4th video is about to be released. This was the first video, and it really talked about, you know, COVID fatigue and being tired of wearing a mask, but understanding that, you know, this is something that still needs to be done. Theo is one of our youth interns who's been with us since the beginning of this program and is also immunocompromised. And so speaking from an immunocompromised point of view is so inspiring and very helpful to our work. Oh my goodness, we're running in this marathon of a pandemic. Yes, that was like, when that was said, I was like, oh, we have it. And honestly, I really framed all these videos as a who, where, when, why. And I just basically was like, I'm going to ask you a question and you're going to tell me how you feel. And we did this with a collaboration with NICEAL, which is one of the partners that we worked with. We also made sure to get Spanish translations for the captioning, because I wanted to make it bilingual. And I thought that was very important. Again, I'll provide the link so you can actually watch the 3 videos that are currently live right now. That's on Instagram. I can also provide a YouTube link as well, if that's fine with you as well. But that's just one of the ways that we can do things. We can do it through video, or we can put these videos on TikTok. That's where youth are accessing information right now. So we're going to go over to the next slide. All right, so let's go to number 2, fact-based posting and self-care tips. So I'm going to give you a little highlight of the posting that we put on social media and also through our outreach intentions. So the first one on the side were little QR codes that I made, and it was like boost up or get vaccinated. This was one of the later designs, but we were really encouraging to get boosted. And it would say scan me, and that would go directly into vaccinefinder.nyc.gov, a URL I will probably never forget for the rest of my life because I've been saying it for 2 years. And we also did this in Spanish as well. Each of our organizations were targeted with specific zip codes. Ours was 10039, which is up in Harlem. So we wanted to make sure that it was accessible for everybody. Not only did we do this, we did PPE distribution where we handed out masks and had conversations with the community. And then here in Meow, there's no scientific data, but I do feel like putting cats in things gets people to listen and, you know, maybe just kind of stop and take a moment. Again, no scientific data to back that up, but cats do things that are positive instead of just dropping things off of shelves. But here in Meow was a little Instagram live that we did. So we went directly to the source of the youth, and we had just a moment where I would have one of our interns, Theo was at this one as well, and we just talk about COVID and vaccinations and mandates and all the changes that were happening, and just having an organic discussion. Maybe I'd have a theme, maybe I didn't. But either way, we just have this discussion that was youth-centered so that other youth might want to get into the conversation. Q-Chat is a youth chat that I facilitate weekly, and we would have real-life, authentic conversations about COVID. This was more geared for youth 13 through 19. We do 13 through 24 HMI, so I was able to get a younger perspective on COVID and what the young people are feeling. And then a quarantine, this was a pandemic specific post where we're all stuck and a lot of us were playing Animal Crossing or, you know, watching a show that we never wanted to watch, we did, is a quarantine self-care checklist. And this was just something I found that was on, you know, just one of the Pinterest sites, and I wanted to share it with everybody else as a way to say, hey, we care about you, we care about your experiences, and here are ways that you can help care for yourself. Self-care is so important for young people. Let's go to our next slide. And number 3, monkeypox, right? So let's talk about monkeypox. You know, we thought sharks were ruining our waters. Monkeypox was coming here, and that was also ruining our summers and just making it really scary for people, because not only are we dealing with COVID, now we're dealing with monkeypox, now we're dealing with polio, and that really makes people anxious. You know, I know there was one report with a gentleman who got all 3 at once. So it kind of creates a little bit of anxiety. So, you know, New York City declared monkeypox a public health emergency on Saturday, July 30th, calling the city the epicenter of the outbreak. Unfortunately, New York doesn't have to be number 1 in every single thing that we do, but I will say with all of the vaccination kind of, you know, rush and the vaccination shortage, we were able to vaccinate over 73 youth within our site with a partnership with the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene. They were able to give us a site. They assigned all the organizations specific sites. Ours was Queens. And we were able to get our young people vaccinated. We also had to do specific posts regarding our pantry, which I manage. And overall, we wanted to make sure that it was providing up-to-date information in a way that respects autonomy and consent. A lot of times, and on a personal note, is when I first heard about it, I was like, oh my God, I do not want, you know, this to be known as a gay disease. And I hate to even say that. But, you know, a lot of times that's the stigma that we're trying to reduce when we're trying to provide that care, is not, you know, basing our responses on negative stereotypes that harms active communities. and really just addressing the issue at hand. And that's really reducing the risk. That's really making sure that everyone has what they need. And we're still, taking youth to get vaccine referrals. So it's an ongoing process within HMI, but getting the word out, being there to answer questions, going to webinars such as you're coming here to find out more about information so that we can thoroughly digest it. Because sometimes a lot of these things are confusing, and it all comes at once and you're trying to figure it all out and kind of figuring it out in a way to, help youth and to really be there for them. All right. And we're going to go into it. So this is just kind of, authentic information. This source from CDC, Department of, Health, Mental Hygiene. This is directly, related to what's going on. So these are pantry policies, vaccination requirements, and things like this. The last 3 slides were a carousel post. I love a good carousel post. You can get as much information as you want. People will scroll by, and I was like, hey, if you need to get vaccinated, do this, or call them directly, which I found was really helpful to call. And then also eligibility and clothing. We just kind of stopped doing a shower at some point because of towel transmission. We're about to open it up with our new washer and dryer, which I'm super excited in space. But just to make sure that they have what they need in a clear, concise way that doesn't make youth feel judged. It's about respecting autonomy, giving that information, reducing stigma, and being really conscious about the words that we're saying and how it can, either create an intentional space or unintentional harm. All right, and next slide, and then Finn, I made it into Art Deco font because I think Finn just sounds condescending, but in an artistic way. I do hope you enjoyed this amazing slides that I made, and I'm going to go ahead and get those links for you so you can actually watch the video with sound. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Crimson and Lauren and Aisha. Thank you for just sharing your very unique perspectives. And I also want to let everyone know that our the chat function for attendees has been enabled. So if you would like to ask questions through the chat, or you can also utilize the Q&A box function as well to ask your questions. So I know we have about 10 minutes left, so I'm going to just move forward with our Q&A portion for tonight. So I will start us off by asking some of the pre-submitted questions from attendees. So first question, this is directed to Aisha and Lauren. How will all these new vaccines affect our children long-term, even though they are needed?
Okay, I can go first. I'm assuming by new vaccines, they're talking about COVID vaccines since polio vaccines aren't new. I think that's a really great question. I think it's a really understandable concern. I think the thing to remember with vaccines is that they're designed to trigger an immune response and then leave the body. So they don't stay in your body for a long time. And for that reason, it's extremely unlikely that they'll cause long-term issues. So any side effects for vaccines, and this is true of COVID vaccines and any other vaccine, you would see those within a few minutes to a few weeks. Beyond that point, you really don't see effects from vaccines. And that's what we've seen with COVID-19 as well. Generally, people will have short-term side effects that go away within a few days. And even people who have longer-term side effects, you're not seeing anything beyond, 1 or 2, 3 weeks. So with children, you shouldn't have to worry about them having a long-term effect, months or years down the line, because that's just not something that is generally seen with vaccines. And Lauren, I don't know if that's your experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, vaccines are giving your body, they're a set of instructions for your body on how to respond to something, and they are designed for us to get rid of them, and they don't hang around. The other thing I'll say is that with vaccines, we're really comparing. You're always comparing the risk of a adverse effect, which do happen. They're rare. They're about a 1 in a million of something really significant happening, but you're comparing that to the risk of the illness, not the risk of nothing. So, anything that, any effects that you feel on your body from the vaccine, the virus itself can do that and then some.
Great, thank you so much both. So moving on to the next question, and I can definitely elaborate. So the question was, has there been any long-term COVID-19 found in children? And maybe you can also just, since this question can be for anyone here, but if you're interested, can you elaborate on sort of like what that means for like the work that you're doing or just for public health in general?
I can start. I mean, we definitely, there definitely have been reported cases of kind of a post-COVID syndrome in kids. It can range from taking a little longer than expected to get over the initial symptoms, fatigue, a lingering cough, lingering abnormalities with smell and taste, some hair loss, to things that are more serious. During the first wave, we did see a very serious post-COVID complication that called MASC, where it found it from the hospital. And as time goes on, we are certainly seeing some longer kind of like post-inflammatory fatigue, joint pains, things like that are lingering for months to years without a good explanation. And we do, from all the data we have, it seems that vaccines help to prevent that as much as possible.
Agreed. I can definitely answer, not as a human mom, I only have cats, but shout out to the mothers out there as well. But as somebody who is immunocompromised and actually is currently dealing with long COVID symptoms, I've been dealing with shortness of breath, and I'm twice vaccinated. I am boosted, but I did get COVID back in June, and I've been, dealing with shortness of breath now. And I feel like, it's case by case basis. And I know that some youth have reported, feeling this and that in terms of different types of symptoms. And I feel like it's definitely something to be aware of. I know that when I went personally for my, symptoms, all the doctors I had spoken to said the same thing. We've been hearing this, not like commonly, it's been a common response. But that's why we want to encourage everyone to get vaccinated, but also, talk about, why it's good, why it reduces that risk, and just keeping our kids safe, because we love them all.
Well said. Thank you so much. So moving on to the next question. It's a little loaded here. But so the question is, how prepared are we so we don't have a 2019/2020 repeat or worse? And are we ready to face all in the coming season if they become problematic? And you can go very different ways to answering this question, but if you want to just address it just from your specific experiences and expertise, all yours.
Nobody can be prepared for everything, and look, always prepare for the worst. So when it comes, it doesn't hit as hard. That's how I feel, because you never know what's going to happen. Sometimes, and I'm not speaking from pediatrician or medical advice. I'm just speaking from like everyday advice and, dealing with young people. You never know what's going to happen. So it's always about just being open and receptive and being as flexible as possible.
Yeah, I think this is a really tricky question because it's so dependent on a lot of different factors. The biggest one being just how I think I mentioned but it's depends on how the federal government, the city and state governments how they respond to what's coming in the fall and winter. From what I have seen from the federal government, I think that there is a big push for boosters. And I think there's a general push towards like getting people to be aware of all of the tools and resources that are available to protect them against COVID. I don't know that we have done enough in the last, I know that we haven't done enough in the last 2.5 years to address a lot of the inequities that are still there that prevent people from accessing those resources, or just to make sure that people are, educated about how they can help them. So I can't say that we're unprepared, but I don't think we're as prepared as we could be. But I think that individually and at the community level, people can make sure that they are at least protected. And that's not what you want from public health, but I think that's where we are right now. People can take steps to protect themselves, their families, their communities, and try to advocate for policies that protect everyone, namely just like, I think responsiveness from, governments to, if things start to trend up, that we can respond in an appropriate way. And if that means like bringing back masks indoors, whatever that might look like, making sure that the government is responsive to that. So that's not really an answer to the question, but I think it really depends on what people are doing at the individual level than at the government level. But I do think that at least we do have tools as individuals to stay safe.
All very honest answers. Thank you so much. And we have about 2 minutes left, but before I move on to the last couple of things, I just wanted to ask like any of our panelists, are there any other just closing thoughts that you wanted to share?
I'll go ahead because I know that awkward silence. You're like, is anyone going to say something? Look, I always say this, and this was given to me by former program manager who brought me to HMI. And this is always the best approach for when things are getting anxiety ridden and you don't know what's going on and everything's coming at once. It's a marathon, not a race. Because sometimes there's just things out of your control and you do what you can. And that's why you go home and pet cats. If you don't have a cat, dogs work too. We love all of them, but it's a marathon, not a race. Do what you can.
Yeah, I think that there's been so much over the past few years that have highlighted inequity and areas where we need to do better. But I also think we have seen a huge rise in mutual aid and seen what supports do exist in the community. And I think I would, just continue to encourage everyone to reach out to those around you who you trust to help you make these decisions. And hopefully your healthcare providers are part of that circle. We are happy to talk about these things and to help, shared decision making to build confidence in vaccines and healthcare in general.
Yeah, I mean, I think just my one closing remark, it's just, I mean, it's been a long 2.5 years. So take care of yourself. Don't be too hard on yourself. It's difficult for all of us and much more difficult for some people. So just take care of yourself, take it one day at a time. And also just if you're eligible for a booster, get a booster. Those are my closing thoughts.
Thank you all. And I know we're just a little bit over time. I did post in the chat our 3 raffle winners. Congratulations to Jeffrey Chan, Taniqua Mullen, and Renanzo Williams. So thank you so much for joining. And then just to quickly wrap up, we will be sharing this presentation along with the recording and the resources that Crimson just dropped a little bit ago. So we'll compile all of that and follow up via email. So here are just some additional general vaccine resources for you. And we also just wanted to quickly acknowledge that someone did submit a question around school gun violence and gun control policies. This is absolutely very, very important public health topic to discuss, and it can definitely be its own webinar and conversation. So we did want to first acknowledge that this question was asked and that we wanted to highlight 2 resources from the American Academy of Pediatrics and Everytown Research that may be of value to those struggling with talking about traumatic events with kids, that also complement the second resource that provides more of like that action and policy addressing school shootings. So just wanted to highlight that here before we come to a close. And then, yeah, we already announced the raffle winners, so we're going to reach out to you after this. And I hope that everyone continues to stay safe, hopefully healthy, and enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you so much for joining us. Take care, everyone.